Chapter 6 of the Chaucer Storybook. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sonia. The Chaucer Storybook by Eva March Tappan. Chapter 6. The Pardoner's Tale. The Revellers who went out to meet death. "That was indeed a merry tale," cried Harry Bailey. "And now you, pardoner," he continued, "do you, too, set to work to amuse us. Tell us some story of mirth and jesting, and see you to it that you entertain us well." "Surely, but I must first step into yonder inn and have a bite of cake and a drink or two." But the pilgrims cried, "No, we do not want any bar-room stories. Tell us a tale with a good moral." "Of course I will," declared the pardoner, "but I must have my drink. And while I am drinking, I will think up some good honest story." So the pardoner went into the tavern, and when he came out, this is the story that he told. The Revellers who went out to meet death. There once lived in Flanders a company of wild young men who gave themselves up to foolish revelry. Day and night they rioted. They gambled, they gorged themselves with the richest viands, they drank till they could not have told whether they were men or beasts, and they swore such terrible oaths that it would freeze one's blood to hear them. My story is a truly moral tale about three of these revellers who sat together in a tavern one morning. It was not yet 9 o'clock, but these young rioters did not even await the coming of night for their orgies, and though it was so early, they had already emptied many cups. The tinkling of a bell was heard from the street. "What's that?" one asked, and another replied, "Nothing but the jingling of a bell before a corpse." "Boy," the first called tipsily to the waiter, "do you go and ask the corpse's name, and see that you don't forget it on the way back." "Sir, there's no need of asking," the boy replied, "for I knew 2 hours and more ago who was to be buried this morning, and surely there is no need of telling you, for he was an old companion of yours. He was sitting on a bench dead drunk last night, and a sly old thief that they call Death came upon him suddenly, and thrust a spear through his heart, and the man fell over dead. That old fellow kills all the people in the country hereabouts. He struck down 1,000 the last time of pestilence. My mother used to tell me to see to it well that I was ready to meet him." "The boy tells the truth," declared the tavern keeper. "Why, in the great village over yonder, only a mile from here, Death has slain man, woman, child, page, and hind within this 1 year. I believe he lives there. My word upon it, it needs a pretty wise man to be on his guard against him." "And you call it such a peril to meet him?" said one of the revellers. "I'll tell you, I'll go to seek him by street and by lane, I vow I will. Listen to me, fellows, we are all agreed. Let us each hold up his hand and swear that we will stand by one another like brothers and kill this traitor Death. He has slain many, but before night he'll be dead himself, he will." So the three, all of them half drunk, swore tipsily that they would be as true to one another as born brothers, and then they staggered towards the village that the tavern keeper had pointed out to them. And as they walked they swore many dreadful oaths that if they could only catch this Death, they would surely kill him. Before they had gone half a mile, they came to a stile, and on the other side of the stile was an old man in poor and worn-out garments. He tottered out of their way and said meekly, "God keep you, gentlemen." The proudest of the revellers glanced at him and laughed scornfully. "Old fellow," he said, "why do you keep yourself all wrapped up except your face? Why do you keep on living any longer when you are so old?" The old man looked him straight in the eyes and replied, "I am old because I cannot find a man who will give me his youth and take my age. whether I went to city or country, or even to far away India, it would be the same, and so I must keep my age as long as it is God's will. Neither, alas, will death take my life. That is why I wander about, a restless, miserable wretch. The first thing in the morning and the last thing at night I knock on the ground with my staff, for the ground is the gate to my mother's house, and I cry, 'Dear mother, let me in. See how thin I am. Flesh and skin and blood have withered away. When will my old bones find rest? I would gladly give up to you all that I have, if you would but give me a shroud to wrap me in.' She will not do me the favor, and that is why my face is so pale and wrinkled. But, sirs, it is no honor to you to speak so roughly to an old man who has done nothing to harm you. If you stay in this world, you too will soon be old, and I counsel you not to do to any old man what you would not wish to have done to you when you are old. Farewell, sirs, and God be with you, whether you ride or walk. I must go on my way." "Hold on, old fellow," cried one of the revellers. "You won't get off so easily as that. You talk about this rascally Death, who is always murdering our friends about here. I believe you are his spy, and now if you don't tell us where to find him, it will be the worse for you, understand that. For I have no doubt at all that you are in league with him to slay us young folk." The old man replied, "Sirs, if you want to find Death so badly, certainly I can tell you which way to go. Do you see that little winding path that leads into the woods? I saw him there just now, sitting under an oak tree. He will stay, depend upon it. He'll not run away from you for all your boasting. God save you, and make you mend your ways." The tipsy revellers hurried to the tree to find Death. He was not to be seen, but on the ground there lay a great heap of golden florins, bushels of them, all bright and shining as if they had just been coined. The three men threw themselves down upon the pile of gold. They felt of it, they let it run through their fingers, they held up handfuls of it to see it glitter in the sunshine. After a while the worst villain among them said, "Brothers, you know that I make merry and jest, but I have some wisdom for all that. Now listen to what I say. Here is this great heap of gold, and it is plain enough that our lucky stars have sent it to us that we might have a jolly time all the rest of our lives. And that we will." He swore by a terrible oath. "Who would ever have dreamed that such a thing as this would have come to us? But now listen. This gold must be taken care of, and we might count ourselves in luck if it were safely stored away in either my house or yours. But how are we going to get it there? We cannot carry it by daylight, for someone would be sure to see us, and then the officers would say we were thieves, and they would hang us for taking care of our own gold. We must carry it in the night, that is sure, and be sly about it at that. And we must keep watch of it all day, or else some thief will find it and steal it from us. Now hear my plan. We will draw lots, and the one to whom the lot falls shall run to the town as fast as ever he can, and secretly get some bread and wine. While he is gone, the other two shall keep close watch and ward, and then, if all goes well, as soon as night comes, we will carry the treasure wherever we may decide will be the safest place." The others agreed to this plan, and they drew lots. The lot fell to the youngest, and he ran off cheerfully all the way to the town, but long before he reached it, he too had a plan in his head. The two who were left behind set them down beside the gold, but even while they could still hear the footsteps of him who had gone to the town, the worst villain said to the other, "You know that you and I have sworn to be brothers, and so I am going to tell you something that will greatly advantage you. Now here is a great heap of gold, but when it is divided among three of us, the heaps will be much smaller. If I could manage matters so it need only be divided between us two, shouldn't I be doing you a favour?" "In faith you would," the other replied. "But I don't see how you would set about it. He knows that the gold was here when he left us, and what could we say to him?" "Will you vow to keep the plan secret?" demanded the first villain. "If you will, I can tell you in 2 words how to bring it about." "I vow," declared the second villain, "that, whatever comes, I will never betray you." The first villain bent himself across the heap of gold and drew the other villain nearer to him, and then he whispered in his ear, "There are 2 of us, and 2 are stronger than 1. Now do you understand? This will be the way. When he comes, do you begin a friendly wrestling match. While you are wrestling as if in sport, I will slip up behind him and thrust my knife into his side. Then do you draw out your dagger and do the same. And then, my dear true friend, we shall have all this gold for our 2 selves. We can drink the rarest wines, we can gamble as much as we will, and all our lives long we shall be free to do as we list." So it was that the 2 villains plotted to kill the third. But the third had also a thought in his head, as I have said before, and no matter how fast he ran, his wicked scheme grew faster. "Oh, the gold, the gold!" he said to himself. "If I could only have it all for my own, I should be the happiest man in the world. But there's no way out of it. 2 parts must go to them, and only 1 to me." And then he, too, made an evil plan. He hurried to an apothecary and said, "Sir, I am so troubled with rats that I do not know what to do. Can you sell me a poison that will make way with them?" "That I can," replied the apothecary. "Here in this cabinet I keep a powder, and if you should give a bit of it no larger than a grain of wheat to any creature on the earth, he would fall down dead before you had walked a mile." The villain went away from the apothecary with some of the poison safely stored away in a little box. He went next to a man who lived close by, and borrowed 3 large wine bottles, and filled them with wine. Into 2 of them he put the poison, but the third he kept free for his own drinking that night. "For I shall have to labour and toil all night long," he said to himself, "to get the gold safely stored away in my house before daylight." So it was that the 2 plans were laid, and it came to pass that both of them were carried out. The 2 villains who had stayed in the woods to watch the gold began the wrestling, and in it killed the third just as they had plotted. Then they sat down to make merry and to drink the wine, and in less time than one could walk a mile they both lay dead. This was the end of the revellers who set out to find Death, for so it was that they found him. End of chapter 6.
Chapter 7 of the Chaucer Storybook. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Beth Thomas. The Chaucer Storybook by Eva March Tappan. Chapter 7. The Wife of Bath's Tale. The next pilgrim called upon for a tale was the wife of Bath. She chose to tell one of the days of King Arthur. The Unknown Bride. In the olden times, many 100 years ago, the whole land was full of fairies. They were on the hills and in the valleys, and whoever went to any green meadow was sure to see the elf rings where the fairy queen and her merry rout had been dancing the night before. There are no fairies now, and if you go where they used to be, you will be sure to see a begging friar roaming up and down the land, but never a fairy. Now, in the times when there were fairies everywhere, it came to pass that a knight who dwelt at King Arthur's court forgot his vow to guard all women, and treated one despitefully. The law was that any knight so faithless to his word should straightway be put to death, But this knight was a favourite at the court, and every one of the court ladies from the Queen down pleaded that his life might be spared. They begged King Arthur for mercy so often and so earnestly that at length he said, "I will give him to the Queen, and he may live or die according to her will." The Queen and all her ladies thanked the King, and then the Queen said to the guilty knight, "It is true that we have besought the King for you, but your life is not yet sure. It is not right that you should go unpunished. The rope is even now about your neck, but on one condition you shall be free. If in a year and a day you can tell me what it is that women wish for most, then your life shall be spared." The knight took his leave of the Queen and of the court, and went his way to find out what women wish for most. He roamed the world over and asked every one that he met. They all had answers, some of them most excellent ones, but the trouble was that no two agreed. One said that women cared most for riches, another said for honour, another for merriment, another for brilliant attire, another for praise, another for freedom. One even insisted that a woman would rather keep a secret than do anything else. But of course that is nonsense, for we women cannot conceal things. Don't you know Ovid's story of King Midas? He had a pair of ass's ears, but he contrived to hide them so well under his long hair that no one in the world except his wife knew they were there. He begged her most earnestly not to let anyone know the secret, and she promised that if the whole world were offered her she would never reveal it. She meant to keep her word, but that secret bubbled and swirled so about her heart that she felt she could not live without telling someone. She did not dare tell it to any person, and so she slipped away to a marsh that was full of reeds. She stooped and put her mouth down close to the water and whispered, "Oh, water, I am going to tell you a secret, but don't you ever let anyone know it. My husband has 2 long ass's ears." And there you see that we women cannot keep a secret. But to go back to the knight. When he found that go where he would and ask whom he would, no 2 persons agreed in their answers, he was sorrowful indeed, for if not even 2 people thought the same, there was no hope that he had found the answer which would save his neck from the rope. But the day had come when he must return, or else his sureties would be put to death in his place. He turned about sadly, and with many a sigh he rode along by the edge of the forest. As he cast his eyes a little way ahead, he saw full 24 ladies dancing gaily on a little green. "Perhaps they are some of the wise folk, and can give me the answer," he said to himself, and he hastened towards them eagerly. But alas, before he had come to the dance, the ladies had all disappeared, and in their place was one old crone, bent and bowed and more hideous than he had ever imagined a woman could be. When he came nearer, she rose slowly and clumsily to her feet, and said, "Sir Knight, there is no road here. What are you in search of? We old folk know a good many things, and it may be better for you to tell me what you want." The knight was so miserable that he was glad to tell his trouble to anyone who would listen, and he said, "Good mother, if you could only tell me what it is that women want most, I would reward you well, for I am a dead man if I cannot find out." "What women want most?" repeated the old crone. "There is no difficulty about telling that. See, we will make a bargain. I will tell you the answer, if in return you will agree to do the first thing I ask of you." "By my faith as a knight, I promise you," he said, and indeed he was so wretched that he would have promised anything to anyone who would give him the slightest hope of safety. The woman said, cheer up, my good knight. Your life is safe, for I will wager my own that the humblest and the proudest, the poorest and the richest, even the Queen herself, will have to say that I am right. Don't be afraid. This is your answer." And she whispered a few words into his ear. It was not long before the knight came to the palace, and sent a message to the Queen that he had kept his day faithfully, and was ready with his answer. A time was set, and all the ladies of the court, maidens, wives, and widows, came together to hear what answer he would give. The Queen sat on a dais with the court ladies around her. There was no need of calling for silence, for everyone there was holding her breath and straining her ears to hear what the knight would say. He walked into the room with his head held up fearlessly, and bowed low before the Queen. "Tell me," she said, "what is it that women most desire?" There was no need that the court ladies should strain their ears, for the knight answered in a clear, manly voice, "The thing that women most desire is to rule their husbands. This is their strongest wish. I declare it, even though you put me to death. I am at your mercy. Do with me as you will." There was not one court lady present who would deny the truth of what he had said. They all agreed that he ought to have his life, and the queen at once declared that he was free of every bond and claim. "No, my lady queen," said a strange voice, "I beg your mercy, but there is yet a claim upon him. Give me justice, I pray, before you depart. I told the knight what answer to make, and in return he vowed by his knightly faith that he would do the first thing I should ask of him, if it were in his power. Now, before this court, I demand, Sir Knight, that you take me for your own wedded wife. You know well that I saved you from the gallows tree. If I speak falsely, deny this upon your faith." "Alas," said the knight, "I know only too well that such was my promise, but for God's sake make another choice. Take all my wealth if you will, but let me go free." "No," she replied, "I am old and homely and poor, but for all the gold that is buried in the earth I would not give up being your wife and your love." "My love? Rather my ruin," said the knight. "Alas, that such a thing should be, that such a shame should befall my house!" There was no help for it, however. He must take the old crone for his wife, and so he married her, but you may know well that there was no merriment and no feasting at that wedding. After the wedding, the knight was so glum and serious that the bride said, "Is this the way the King Arthur's knights behave with their brides? I am your love and your wife, and surely I have never done you a wrong. Did I not save your life? Why do you treat me so? If I have done anything unkind to you, tell me what it is, that I may make all the amends in my power." "Amends!" cried the knight. "There are no amends that can be made, for you come of such common folk, and you are so poor and old and homely." Then the bride told him that folk might indeed hand down their wealth to their children, but not their goodness; that a man is not noble because he is the son of a duke or an earl, but because he himself does noble deeds. "I am of gentle blood," she said, "if I live virtuously and do not sin. And as for my poverty," she continued, "it is true that a man would never choose to be poor, but nevertheless he who is poor need have no dread of thieves. Poverty is like a glass through which one may see who are his true friends, and sometimes poverty teaches a man to know both his God and himself. You call me old, but is it not true that gentle folk of honour and courtesy never fail to show respect to age? Often it happens that with age comes wisdom." The knight could not help seeing that her words were wise and true, and when she asked, "Would you rather have me old and poor and homely, and come of common folk, but a faithful loving wife, or perchance young and rich and handsome and of high birth, but careless of your love, and maybe false to you?" He pondered and sighed and pondered, and at last he said, "I believe that you are wise and good, and I take you for my true and faithful wife." "On my word, I will be to you as true a wife as ever lived since the world was made," declared his bride. "Now kiss me once, and then draw up the curtain." The knight obeyed, and when he had drawn up the curtain and turned his eyes upon her in the full sunlight, behold, she was young and fair and charming. He caught her in his arms and kissed her, not once but 1,000 times, and then 1,000 more. And unto the last day of their lives they lived in peace and happiness. End of chapter 7.
Chapter 8 of the Chaucer Storybook. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Phil Schempf. The Chaucer Storybook by Eva March Tappan. Chapter 8. The Friar's Tale. When the friar's turn had come, he told a tale about a certain summoner, whose business it was to summon to the archdeacon's court all those in his jurisdiction who were accused of breaking the laws of the church. The archdeacon did not always know how much this summoner was getting from the people, for the man would often threaten them without ground or reason, and to get rid of being called before the court they were right glad to fill his purse or make him great feasts at the alehouse. The Story of the Summoner. Now it came to pass one day that a summoner wanted a little money, so he set out to summon an old widow. As he rode along by the forest, he saw riding before him a gay young yeoman with bright new bow and arrows. He wore a short coat of black and a hat with black fringe. "Sir," said the summoner, "greeting and good cheer to you." "Welcome," returned the stranger, "to you and to every good fellow and true. Whither go you under this green shade? Do you ride far today?" "Oh, no," the summoner answered. "I am only going right here to collect a rent for my lord." "Ah, you are a bailiff, then?" "Yes, truly," he replied, for he was ashamed to own that he was a summoner. "Then we are both bailiffs," said the yeoman. "I am a stranger in this part of the country, and I shall be glad of your acquaintance. Of your brotherhood, too, if so be you are of like wish. If you ever chance to come into my shire, you will find that I have plenty of gold and silver in my chest, and whatever of it you may need shall be your own. I promise you that." The summoner thanked the stranger heartily. The two men grasped each other's hands and vowed to be sworn brethren to the last day of their lives. And then they rode on, talking pleasantly together. The summoner was full of chatter, and he was never done with his questioning. "Brother," he asked, "where do you live? Where should I look for you if I would find you some other day?" The yeoman replied to him smoothly and politely. "Far in the north country," he said, "where I hope, my brother, I shall sometime see you. Before we separate, I will tell you the way so carefully that you will never miss my house." Then the summoner introduced a new subject. "Now, brother," said he, "since you are a bailiff as well as I beg you to tell me some trick that will help me to get the most money from my office. No matter whether it is right or wrong, but tell me, as a brother, how you manage matters." "Now, by my truth, dear brother," replied the other, "I will tell you an honest tale. My lord is stingy and close-fisted, and I have a hard place. Therefore I live by getting just as much from every man as he can be made to give. I get my pay either by trick or by force, but I get it. You may depend on that." "That is my way too," said the summoner. "I take everything I can lay hold of unless it is too heavy or too hot. I could not live in any other way. And there's one thing more. I won't tell of this in confession. We are well met, I am sure, but, dear brother, tell me your name, I pray." The yeoman smiled a queer little smile. "Brother," said he, "do you really want me to tell you? Then here it is. I am a fiend, and my dwelling place is hell, and I'm riding about to gather in whatever I can, for this is all my income. You don't care how you get your money, and neither do I. I would ride to the end of the earth for my prey." "Ah," said the summoner, "how is this? I certainly thought you were a yeoman. You have a man's form as much as I. Do you have a form when you are at home in hell?" "No, we have none there," the fiend replied. "But we can take one whenever we choose, or we can make anyone think that we have the form of a man, or an ape, or an angel for that matter. That is nothing wonderful. A common juggler can cheat you, and surely I have more skill than he." The summoner would have gone on asking question after question, but the fiend gently cut him short. "Hereafter, my dear brother," he said, "you shall come where you will not need to learn of me. Now let us ride on briskly, for you may be sure that I shall stay with you, unless you leave me." "Oh, no," declared the summoner. "That will never come to pass. We have sworn to be brothers, and I will keep my word, even though you were Satan himself. You take all you can get, and I will do the same, and if either of us gets more than the other, then let him share." "Agreed, by my faith," declared the fiend, and then they rode on together to the edge of the town where the summoner had planned to go. In the road was a cart loaded with hay, and it bade fair to stand in the road for some time to come, for the mud was so deep that, try as they would, the horses could not stir it. The carter beat them and shouted as if he were mad. "Go on, Scott! Get up, Brock! The fiend take you and the cart and hay too!" "Here's somewhat for you," said the summoner softly to the fiend. "Listen, brother, listen. Don't you hear what the carter says? Take it. He has given it all to you, hay and cart and his 3 good horses." "No," the fiend responded. "I cannot take that, because he doesn't mean it in earnest. Ask him for yourself if you doubt me, or else wait a little and you will see." The carter struck his horses another blow, and they began to pull harder than ever. "Get up!" he cried. "There, we are out of it at last. That was well done, old Grey. God save thee, and bless everything that he ever made." "Now, brother," said the fiend, "now you see I cannot get anything from this wagon, so let us go on farther." They passed on through the town. When they came near to the end, the summoner whispered to the fiend, "My brother, an old woman lives in yon small house, who would about as soon lose her neck as give up a penny. I will have 12 pence out of her, though, if she goes mad, or I will summon her to our court. I don't know any wrong of her, but no matter. Now watch me, brother, and since you do not seem to know how to get what belongs to you in this country, you can follow my example and learn from me." The summoner knocked loud at the widow's gate. "Come out!" he called. "Come out!" "Who is that?" asked the woman. "Ah, God save you, sir. What is your will?" "I have here," replied the summoner, "a bill requiring you to appear at the archdeacon's court tomorrow morning to answer certain charges made against you." "I call God to witness," declared the woman, "that I cannot. I have been sick for a long while, and my side pains me so that I can neither ride nor walk. Sir Summoner, may not one appear for me at the court, and answer there to whatever thing is charged against me?" "Yes," replied the summoner. "Pay me 12 pence, and I will see to the matter. I shall get small gain from it. My master has the profit, not I. Come, give me the 12 pence, and let me ride on. I can't wait here any longer." "12 pence!" cried the widow. "I have not 12 pence to my name. You know right well that I am poor and old. Have pity on me in my trouble." "Never," declared the summoner. "May the fiend take me if I let you off, even if it ruins you." "Alas!" she wailed. "God knows I have done nothing wrong." "Pay the 12 pence," growled the summoner, "or I will carry away your new pan for the debt that you owed me before." "You say false!" she shrieked. "Never in all my life was I summoned to your court till now. May the fiend take you and my pan too." When the fiend heard this, he drew nearer. "Good mother," he asked gently, "do you really mean what you are saying?" "May the fiend take him, pan and all, if he does not repent," repeated the old woman. "Repent indeed!" cried the summoner. "I will not repent of taking anything from you. I wish I had everything that belongs to you." "Now, brother," said the fiend, "don't be angry, but you and this pan are mine by right, and this very night you shall go to my dwelling in hell with me." And with that the fiend caught him and bore him away, body and soul, to the place where folk like him have heritage prepared. End of chapter 8.
Chapter 9 of the Chaucer Storybook. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Chaucer Storybook by Eva March Tappan. Chapter 9. The Clerk's Tale. The clerk had been riding along quietly, and apparently thinking about something other than the stories that the rest of the company were telling. Suddenly the host turned towards him and said, "Sir Clerk of Oxford, you ride along as shy as a young wife sitting at the table with her husband for the first time. I have not heard a word from you today. I suppose you are pondering over some deep question or other. But Solomon said there was a time for everything, and be sure of it, this is not the time to study. When a man has begun a game, he ought to play it. Come then, tell us a good story. Don't preach us a sermon, and don't put us to sleep, but tell us a cheerful, wide-awake tale of adventures. Keep your fine rhetoric and your logic to use when you are writing in lofty fashion, as one would write to a king, and talk to us plainly enough so we can understand you." The clerk replied full of courtesy, "My host, I am at your service. You are our governor, and certainly I will pay my best obedience to you. I will tell you a story that I once heard at Padua from a worthy clerk named Francis Petrarch. He is dead now. God grant peace to his soul. Patient Griselda, in the western part of Italy, there is a broad, sunny plain, rich and fertile. Scattered over it are many ancient towns, whose towers were founded in the days of our ancestors. A certain marquis named Walter was ruler of this land, and his forefathers had been before him. He was honest and courteous, and he ruled his country well. His people feared him and obeyed him, but they loved him too, and they dreaded to have the time come when he would no longer be their lord. They wished more earnestly that he would marry. If he only had a son, they said, who would follow in his father's footsteps, we should feel at rest. The marquis showed no wish to marry. He was young and strong, and was enjoying himself so much with his hunting and hawking and other pleasures that he was inclined to let matters slide, and come what might, he would not take a wife. The people talked the question over, and at length one of the wisest among them said, "Let us go to the marquis, and tell him humbly how much we honor him and love him, and how it would grieve us if his line should fail and some stranger come to take the rule over us." This was agreed to, and soon a number of the marquis's subjects went to see him. One man, to whom he had shown special favor, acted as a spokesman. He told his lord how his people felt, and begged him earnestly, though with all meekness, that he would permit them to choose him a wife from among the noblest of the land. The marquis could not help being touched by the faithfulness of his people and their love for him, and he promised to take a wife. Then he said to them, "I had never thought of being married, but now that I am giving up my freedom at your request, I ask something of you in return. I will choose a wife for myself wherever my heart may be set. You need not to be burdened with that charge, and I ask you to swear to me most solemnly that, whatever wife I may select, that you will neither carp nor cavil at my choice. And, furthermore, I must also have your sworn promise that whoever she may be, you will show her the reverence and respect which you would show to the daughter of an emperor, and that this shall never fail so long as her life shall endure." The people were ready enough to take the oath, but even then they were afraid that month after month would slip by and the marquis would still delay his marriage. Therefore they knelt before him even more humbly, and begged that he would of his great goodness add to the kindness he had already shown them by setting a day for his wedding. The marquis named a day, and promised that without fail he would take to himself a wife when that time should come. People thanked him over and over again, and then went joyfully to their homes, while the marquis sent off his officers, and bid them see to it that on that day a noble wedding feast should be made ready. Not far from the splendid palace of the marquis there was a little village where only poor folk lived. The poorest of them all was a man named Janicula, but he was rich in one respect, for he had a fair young daughter named Griselda. She was not only beautiful, but she was industrious and good. and she did everything in her power to help her poor old father. They had a few sheep, and when she went out to watch them, she always carried her distaff with her, that she might spin as she watched. On her way home, she gathered roots and herbs to cook for their frugal meals, and in everything she gave her father loving care and reverence and honor. The Marquis had often noticed this young girl as he was on his way to the hunt. He saw how womanly she was, and he noted what the people in the village said of her goodness. He often thought of her face, not only beautiful, but pure and strong and true, and he had resolved that if he ever married anyone, this young girl should be his wife. Day after day passed. Lavish preparations for the wedding were going on at the palace. The country had been scoured for dainty viands. The whole house had been put in order and arranged as handsomely as a house may be. The Marquis had sent his messengers to the other lands for gems whereof to make rings and brooches, and necklaces and bracelets. He had even had many rich and costly garments made, to the measure of one of the court ladies, who was much the height and figure of the humble village maiden. The wedding day had come, but even then no one knew who was to be the bride, and the people began to wonder secretly whether after all the Marquis was only making fools of them. The lords and ladies had come to the wedding. The Marquis in his richest array came forward to give them greeting. "But before we seat ourselves at the feast," he said, "we will ride a little way to the small village near at hand." So all the splendid assembly set out for the little village, wondering and wondering what wild whim the Marquis had in his mind. It was a brilliant company, and as they rode along, the way was bright with velvet and satin, cloth of gold, with rubies and emeralds and diamonds and all the other beautiful adornments that the wedding guests had provided to do honor to the Marquis and the high-born maiden, whom he would of course choose for his bride. Not only the people who lived in great houses were interested in the marriage, but also the folk of every tiny hamlet, and naturally the maiden Griselda. When she heard that the Marquis and his guests were on their way, she hurried to finish her morning's work, so that she would have time to stand in the doorway with the other young girls to see the new Marchioness if the wedding party should chance to return that way. She was just bringing a water pot of water from the well when the Marquis called. "Griselda!" She set down the water pot and fell upon her knees before him to hear what his will might be. "Griselda," he said, "where is your father?" She replied humbly, "Lord, he is here," and then went into the cottage and brought her father out. The Marquis dismounted and left the glittering rout, took the old man's hand and led him to one side. "Janicula," he said, "I can no longer hide the wish of my heart. If you will grant me leave, I will take your daughter for my wife before I go from this place, and mine she shall be, so long as her life shall endure. I know well that you love me, and have been my faithful liegeman all your days. Tell me then, are you willing to take me as your son-in-law?" "My will is then," said the Marquis gently, "that I and you and she confer together in your house in order that you may hear all that is said. I will ask her in your presence if she is willing to become my wife and to obey my wish in all things." The humble village maiden was not used to so lordly a guest, and it was a small wonder that her face was pale. The Marquis took her by the hand and said, "Griselda, I wish to take you for my bride. This will be pleasing to your father, and I suppose to you. But first, I want your free answer to what I ask. If you become my wife, do you promise to do my will, and never grumble whether I give you pleasure or pain? Do you promise that when I say yes, you will never say no, either by words or by a frown? Swear this, and here I swear to take you for my wife." Griselda was trembling with fear and wonder, but she answered, "Lord, I am not worthy of such an honor, but if this is your will, it is also mine." I swear that I will rather die than willingly disobey you in deed or in thought." "Enough, my Griselda," said the Marquis, passed out of the door, the maiden following him with modest, downcast face. And there they stood in full view of the noble company of guests. While the guests gazed and wondered, and, turning aside, smiled scornfully, he said in a loud, clear voice, "This maiden is to be my wife. If anyone claims to honor me and love me, let him honor her and love her. There is no more to be said about it." Then the beautiful new robes were brought out that the Marquis had made, and the haughty court ladies had to go into the tiny cottage and dress the humble village maiden in the velvets and satins. They combed and braided her hair, and set a crown upon her head, and loaded her with jewels, rich and rare. Then they led her out before the people, and her beauty was so brought out by all this brilliant attire that even the folks of her own village almost doubted that this was she. The Marquis wedded her with a ring that he had brought with him, and set her upon a snow-white horse, and they rode on to the castle. The retinue grew longer all the way, for the story of the marriage had gone before them, and the people of every little village through which they passed turned out to do honor to the child of their own people, who had now become Marchioness. When the company reached the palace, the feasting began, and the revels lasted till the very setting of the sun. To make a long story short, God gave such grace to the new Marchioness that no one who looked upon her would have fancied that she had grown up in a cottage, but rather in the palace of an emperor. Everyone loved her and reverenced her, and even the people who had known her ever since she was born could hardly make themselves believe that she was the daughter of their simple, honest neighbor, Janicula. The report of her great excellence spread not only through Saluce, but through other countries, and many people came long distances merely to look upon her face. Not only could she rule the house well, but if any trouble arose among the people of the land, she was so wise and so just that she always succeeded in bringing them to peace. And indeed, more than one man declared that she had surely been sent from heaven to right every wrong. After a while, a daughter was born to her, and then the palace was even happier than before. So it came to pass that the Marquis and his wife of humble birth lived together in peace and joy. He could see goodness and prudence in a maid of low degree. Said the people, "He is a wise man," and they loved their lord more than ever. When the baby was only a few months old, a foolish thought came into the heart of the Marquis. He longed to test his wife's steadfastness, and see whether she could keep the promises that she made him on their wedding day. So he came to her one night with a stern and troubled face, and asked, "Griselda, do you remember the day when I took you out of your poverty and made you a Marchioness? Now listen to every word that I say. You are dear to me as ever, but not to my nobles. They say it is shameful for them to have to be subject to you and to serve one of such humble birth. They've said this more and more since your daughter was born. And now, if I would live my life in peace, I am forced to do with the child not what I would choose, but what they demand. I will do nothing without your knowledge or consent, but I require of you now to obey my will with the patience and obedience that you promised on our marriage day." Griselda's face did not change, and not a tear did she shed, even though her heart was breaking. She replied humbly, "Lord, my child and I are yours, and surely you may do with your own as you will. Whatever pleases you pleases me. There is nothing in the world that I dread, except to lose you." The Marquis was delighted at her words, but he kept on his sober face and left the room. There was in his service a man whom he could trust to do either good or evil without a question, whichever he was bidden. The Marquis gave him his orders, and in a short while he burst into the room of the Marchioness and said roughly, "Madame, you will have to pardon me, but you are so wise that you must know that whatever Lord Walter commands has to be done. I am bidden to take that child away. The knave looked as if he were ready to slay the baby before its mother's eyes, and yet Griselda sat meek and still, and did not even weep. At last she asked humbly, "May I kiss my child before it dies?" She sadly held the little one to her heart, and soothed it and kissed it. Then she made the sign of the cross upon it, and said a blessing over it. She spoke to it gently. "Farewell, my little girl," she whispered. "I shall never see you again. May God bless you, little child, for tonight you must die for my sake." Then to the officer she said meekly, "I give you back your little one. Go now and do as my lord commanded you. But if he does not forbid, I beg you in mercy to bury this little body in some place where neither beasts nor birds of prey will find it, and tear it up in pieces." The officer made no reply. He caught up the child roughly and went his way. When he stood before his lord with the child in his arm, the Marquis said, "Wrap the child up warmly, and carry it gently to my sister, the Countess of Pavia. Tell her to take care for it with all kindness, but never to let it be known whose child it is. And Sarah," he continued, "if you wish to keep your head on your shoulders, see to it that no one finds out where you are going, and what you are carrying." The officer went to obey his lord's commands, and the Marquis sought his wife to see how she would behave toward him. Both that day, and even afterward, she was the same as at the time of their marriage, always pleasant and meek and loving, and ready to serve him. Her grief she bore in silence, and never even spoke her daughter's name. 4 years later Griselda had another child, a boy, and now the whole country rejoiced that their ruler had a son to follow him. Alas, when it was 2 years old, the Marquis took a fancy to try his wife again. He said to her suddenly, "Wife, you know how displeased my people were at our marriage. Now that we have a son, they are more angry than ever. They say, when Walter is gone, the grandson of Janicula will be our ruler. I cannot endure this murmuring. I want to live in peace with my people, and there is nothing else to do but to make way with the boy as I did with his sister. I tell you this beforehand so that you may not forget yourself when it comes to pass." Griselda replied, "I have always said it was my pleasure to do your will. Even though you slay my daughter and my son, you have the right to do as you choose with your own, and if my own death would please you, I would gladly die." The same officer with the hard, cruel face came to her, and took her fair young son, and still she was so patient that she would not let her face look sad. She only kissed her boy and blessed him, and then, as before, she begged the man to bury the child where beasts and birds of prey would not find him, but he would give her no answer. This child too was carried to the sister of the Marquis at Bologna. Marquis Walter watched his wife closely, but he could not see that she loved him less, or was less eager to serve him and please him. It was quite different with his people, however, for the report had gone through the kingdom that the Marquis was no better than a murderer. For all that he would not give up his cruel purpose, and now he had planned even another test of his wife's faithfulness. He sent an envoy to Rome, bidding him on his return to bring back letters from the Pope to the effect that, as his marriage was making trouble and disorder in the kingdom, he should put away his wife and choose another bride, a lady of noble birth, who would be better fitted to be his Marquis. The envoy obeyed his lord's commands, and soon returned with letters all signed and sealed. Of course they were forged, but the simple folk of the country never thought of that. They were sad and grieved, and poor Griselda was saddest of all. Nevertheless, she kept her calmness and self-control, and did not once forget her promise to her lord. Griselda's daughter had been most tenderly cared for by the sister of the Marquis. For some years the Countess had been the wife of the Earl of Pavia, and the Marquis now sent a letter asking him to bring the 2 children to Skloot. They were to journey in all state and elegance. No one was to be allowed to know who they were. "When people question," wrote the Marquis to his brother-in-law, "say to them that the maiden is on her way to wed the Marquis of Skloot." All was done as the Marquis desired. The young maiden was dressed in the richest array, and loaded with jewels for her marriage, and she and her brother set out in the care of the Earl to journey to Saluces, accompanied by a noble train of gentlefolk, all handsomely attired to do her honor. The Marquis was bent upon trying his faithful wife to the uttermost, and one day, in the presence of all the great folk of his court, he suddenly burst out rudely and said, "Griselda, when I married you, I did not look for wealth or noble birth, but for goodness and faithfulness and obedience. I realize now that if a man is a lord, he is also a servant of his people. A plowman may take what wife he will, but matters are far different with a lord. My people are constantly urging me to choose a wife who is better fitted by rank and lineage for her position. The Pope understands the matter, and in order to quiet the disorders in my country, he has given his consent that I should take another bride. She is already on her way hither. Now do you be strong of heart, and return to your father's house, leaving your place vacant for her. I will give you of my favor whatever dowry you brought with you. No one can always prosper, and I advise you to endure calmly whatever fortune decrees." Griselda replied patiently, "My lord, I always knew that my poverty could not compare with your wealth, and I never thought myself worthy to be your wife, or even your servant. I thank God that in my unworthiness you have honored me so long a while. I will return now to my father, and stay with him in the little cottage where I was born, until the day of my death shall come. God grant that with your new wife you may prosper and be happy. But, my dear lord, you know that when you took me from my father's house, you took no dowry with me, not even the poorest clothes that I was wearing. Now here I give you back my wedding ring, and these rich garments wherein it was your pleasure that I should dress. I ask you only for the undergarments which I wear, that I, who was once your wife, may not go forth in nakedness before the people." "You may keep them," he answered coldly, and turned away. Then Griselda laid off her velvet and her pearls, and robed in white, her head and feet all bare, she went forth humbly to her father's house. The people followed her, sobbing and weeping in their grief, but not a tear did she shed. Her father tottered out from his poor cottage to meet his child, and drew his coat about her nakedness. The Earl of Pavia had now arrived in the city from Bologna, and the news had gone abroad that he brought with him a young maiden to become the Marquis's wife. She had come with such a display of wealth as had never before been seen in a western Lombardy. A messenger came in haste from the Marquis to his former wife, bidding her come straightway to the palace. Griselda obeyed, and humbly knelt before Lord Walter to hear his will. He said, "Griselda, tomorrow the maiden who is to become my wife comes to the palace, and I wish her to be received with every possible honor. You know what I like my house to be, and I've sent for you that you may put every corner in such order as will please me." "My lord," she replied, "the time will never come when I shall not love you with my whole heart, and rejoice to serve you and please you so far as lies in my power." And without more words, she set herself to work to arrange the house, to spread the tables, to make the beds, to hurry up the servants to sweep the floors, and shake the rugs and hangings. She herself worked more diligently than all of them, and it was not long before hall and chambers were most perfectly arranged. About 9 in the morning the noble Earl arrived at the palace with the young maiden and her brother. Now folk are fickle and changeable as a weathercock, and in spite of all the love of Walter's people for Griselda, they were ready for something new. They even whispered among themselves that after all it was best that those who would wed should be of the same degree, and those who had had the good fortune to catch a glimpse of the face of the bride declared that she was verily even fairer than Griselda. The wife whom the Marquis had cast away had gone to the gate with the other folk to greet the newcome Marchioness. She managed all things with such skill and cleverness that every guest was received according to his rank, and they wondered greatly who this could be that knew the custom of the house so well, and yet was so meanly clad. When the gentlefolk were about to seat themselves at the feast, The Marquis sent for Griselda to come to him. "How do you like my fair young bride?" he questioned. And she answered, "I never saw a fairer maiden. God grant you prosperity and joy unto your life's end. But one wish I would make of you. This maid has been brought up more tenderly than I, and I pray and warn you not to wound her as you have wounded me, for she would hardly be able to endure adversity as one who has been less gently cared for." Even this cruel Marquis could no longer bear to torture such a loving, faithful heart. He threw his arms around her neck and kissed her again and again. "My Griselda," he said, "I have tested your steadfastness more severely than woman was ever tried before, and now shall come your reward. This fair maiden who you thought would be my bride is our beloved daughter. The manly boy beside her is our son, and he shall be my heir. I have kept them with my sister at Bologna, with charge to bring them up right carefully. I did not do this thing in malice, but to prove your faithfulness to me and your promised word." Griselda looked like one who had been startled out of her sleep, and she began to understand the Marquis's words. She swooned for joy, and then, arising from her swoon, she called her children to come to her. She put her arms about them and kissed them once and many a time, and dropped her tears upon their bright shining hair. She thought of nothing but the joy of seeing the dear ones whom she had supposed long since dead. "God reward you, my dear lord," she cried, "that you have saved my children for me. It matters nothing if I should die this day, for now I know that my lord's love and favor are my own." Those who stood about her wept great tears of pity, and the Marquis cheered and comforted his wife, and many looks of the tenderest affection passed between them. As soon as the ladies saw their time, they led the Marchioness apart into a chamber, and there they stripped her of a rude gown, and put upon her a robe of gleaming cloth of gold, and set upon her head a glittering crown that shone with many a jewel. And then they brought her back into the hall to take her proper place. So it was that this sad day came to a joyful ending, for every wedding guest did his utmost to make the feasting gay and to do her honor. For many years the Marquis and his wife lived together in peace and joyfulness, and in the palace there was a place for the good Janicula, who dwelt there till his death. The fair young daughter was wedded to a rich and noble lord, one of the worthiest in all Italy. And when the time came for the Marquis to render up his soul to God who gave it him, his son succeeded to the heritage. He wedded a wife who loved him truly and was ever faithful to him. But he was wiser and more tender than his father, and never put her to such a sad and cruel test. End of Chapter 9.
Chapter 10 of the Chaucer Storybook. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Corey Matlack. The Chaucer Storybook by Eva March Tappan. Chapter 10. The Squire's Tale. Cambuscan and the Brazen Horse. Everything had gone on well with the pilgrims. There had been little disagreement, and all had obeyed the host whom they had made their governor. It was now the morning of the 4th day, and good Harry Bailey rode nearer to the handsome young squire and said,
"Squire, can't you tell us a good love story?"
And he added slyly,
"Surely you must know as much about the matter as anyone."
"No, sir," the squire replied, "but I will do as well as I can. I will tell you a story, and if I do not tell it well, I can only ask your pardon. My will is good at all events, and here is the tale." Cambuscan and the Brazen Horse. At Sari, in the land of Tartary, there once dwelt a king named Cambuscan. He was a noble, upright man, hardy and wise, and he was ever faithful to the religion to which he was born. He was a bold warrior, too. He had fought so fiercely against Russia that in his wars full many a brave man had come to his death. But in spite of all the fighting that had fallen to his lot,
He was as eager to win glory in arms as any fresh-made knight of his house. He was handsome and strong. He lived in such a royal estate as one could hardly find anywhere else in the world. This noble king was blessed with 2 sons, Algersith and Camballo. He had also a daughter named Canacee, but there is no use in trying to tell you how beautiful she was, for I have neither the words nor the skill to do such a thing. It would need a great rhetorician, and I am only a plain man. I must speak as I can. Now, when it came to the 21st year of the reign of Cambuscan, he sent out a proclamation through Sari, as he was wont to do, that the 13th of March, his birthday, should be celebrated. When the day had come, the weather was bright and pleasant, the sun was joyous and clear, and the little birds sitting in the beams sang their merriest lays. They seemed to be rejoicing that they were no longer pierced by the cold, keen sword of winter. There was to be a feast at the palace, and when the hour had come, Cambuscan put on his diadem and his richest robes and took his seat at the dais. Then came the feast, and I will tell you the truth, that never in all the world was there a feast so sumptuous. It would take the longest day in summer to describe half the courses, and the order of service at each course. Then, too, there were all sorts of delicacies that are not known in this land. But no one can tell everything. I will go on and relate the tale. 3 courses were done, and the king sat among his nobles, listening to the music of the minstrels, when suddenly through the door of the hall there came a knight riding on a steed of brass. In his hand there was a broad glass mirror, on his thumb was a gold ring, and by his side hung a naked sword. The music stopped. Not a word was spoken, and everyone had gazed curiously at the strange knight. He was most richly armed, save that he wore no helmet. He rode straight up to the table and made his obeisance to the king and queen and lords in the order so reverently and gracefully that if Gawain, with his old-time curtsy, had come forth from the realm of faery, he could have done no better. Then, standing before the high table, he gave his message in a straightforward, manly fashion. As nearly as I can recall, this is what he said. My liege, Lord King of Araby and of India, gives you greeting on this your festival day, and sends you by me your servant, this steed of brass, that in the space of a day can carry you through sunshine or shower to whatever place you may choose. If you should take a fancy to rise as high into the air as eagles flies, this horse will bear you up, high as ever you may wish to go, and he will move so gently that you can sleep on his back if you choose. When you are ready to descend, just twirl a certain wooden pin, and the horse will come down softly as a feather. The workman who made the horse knew all about seals and magic bounds. Many a constellation he watched, waiting until the stars were favorable. The mirror that I hold in my hand is of such virtue that in it you may see when trouble is at hand, whether to you or to your kingdom. It will tell you who is a true friend and who is a secret foe. More than that, if a maiden love a man, she shall know by this glass whether he is true to her or not. And if he be false, there in the mirror will be the portrait of his new love. Nothing can be hidden. All his trickery will be open to her eyes. My king sends this mirror to the fair Lady Canacee, your excellent daughter. He sends her too this ring, and if it should chance that she would like to know the speech of birds and green things that grow, then let her wear this ring upon her thumb, or carry it in her purse, and truly there is no bird flying under the heavens whose language she shall not understand. And she shall also be able to answer each one in its own tongue, and there shall be no blade of grass growing out of the ground that shall not have a voice for her ears. She shall know, too, what virtue it hides within itself to heal the suffering or the wounded. And so she have power to cure him whom she will, however deep and wide his wounds may be. This naked sword that hangs close by my side has other virtue, but of no less worth. If with this sword in your hand you strike a blow, then shall it cut and pierce through all the armor of your foe, be it thick and firm as branching oak. More than this, the wound shall never heal, unless of your favor you may choose to stroke it with the flat of the sword. This is an amazing story, but it is the simple truth, and while the sword remains in your possession, Its power shall never fail." Again the knight bowed low before the king, then rode out of the hall into the court. The brazen horse flashed in the sunshine like a flame of fire, but stood as motionless as stone. The knight was led to his room with all courtesy, unarmed, and brought into the feast. The sword and the mirror were carried by the same officers of rank to the tower, and with much ceremony the ring was presented to the Lady Canacee. As for the horse, there was no question what should be done with that, for try as they might, all the servants of the king together could not stir it a hand's breadth. Neither windlass nor pulley could move it, for these men had no knowledge of the secret pin. Therefore they had good reason to leave it standing in the courtyard. Of course the story spread like flame, and the people from all the country round about came in crowds to gaze at the marvelous horse. "See how tall and broad and long he is," said some. "He has just the right shape and proportion to be strong. He must be of the Lombardy breed." But others said, "No, see how graceful he is, and what a quick eye he has. That is more like a gentle Apulian courser." But whatever blood they thought him, all agreed that certainly no horse that promised greater strength or speed or gentleness or endurance had ever been seen in the kingdom. Of course the marvel was how a horse made of brass could move, as this one has shown that it could. "It is a work of fairy," the crowd declared. They shook their wise heads and fancied all sorts of explanations. They buzzed and murmured like a swarm of bees. They told over and over the fables and tales of old. One said it must be the winged horse Pegasus. Another insisted that it was the veritable steed of Sinon, the Greek who brought about the downfall of Troy, as the old histories say. "I believe some armed men are in that horse," declared one with a shudder. "And they'll try to take the city, and the king and his officers ought to know this, and take good heed of it." Another whispered softly, "There's no truth in that. I believe this thing is only an apparition, like those jugglers bring about by magic at great feasts." So they wondered and surmised, as ignorant people aren't wont to do when things are beyond their comprehension. These simple folk had also much to say of the mirror that had been carried up into the highest tower. They wondered how people could see such things in it as the knight had said. One thought that this might be brought about by an arrangement of angles and secret reflections, and recalled having heard that there was once such an one in Rome. Some spoke of Vitulin and Ellison and Aristotle, and said that in their books there were accounts of strange mirrors and perspective glasses. Others could talk of nothing but the sword that would cut through any kind of armor. They told tales of King Telephus and of a certain magical spear that Achilles was said to have had, which would both wound and heal. They talked about the effects of various drugs, about different ways of hardening metal, and of just when it should be done. Then they had much to say about Canacee's ring. Some declared that they never before heard of such an amazing skill in ring-making. Others recalled that the story that both Moses and King Solomon were said to have such a wonderful knowledge of how to make such things. Still, others insisted that it was no more wonderful to make such a ring than it was to make glass out of fern ashes. "The only difference," they declared, "is that the ring is new to us, and we have known about the glass for so long a while that people have stopped gabbling about it. Folk thought thunder and ebb and flow the tide and gossamer and mist, and, indeed, everything else were most mysterious till they discovered the cause." So they chattered and declared and fancied till the king rose from the table. The loud playing of the minstrels went before him till he came to his room, where were his handsomest hangings and his richest ornaments. Then there was such music that one who had heard it might have deemed himself in heaven. Now was the time for merry dancing. The king seated himself upon the throne, and the stranger knight led out Canacee to the dance. No one but Lancelot could ever have described to you the many kinds of dances, the fresh, bright faces, the sly glances of jealousy. Lancelot is dead, so I must pass over all this merriment. I will say no more, but leave them to their pleasure till the hour for the supper had come. The steward called for spices and wine, and all ate and drank. When they had had their fill, they went to the temple, and after the service was done, they sat down to supper, while it was yet daylight. Why should I describe the many viands at the supper? Everyone knows that when a king gives a feast there are all sorts of dainties, and that the humblest, as well as he who is the most worthy of respect, has plenty of each. After supper, the noble king went to examine the brazen steed, and a great company of lords and ladies went with him. Surely there was never so much wondering about a horse before since the days of the horse of Troy. They talked, and they looked, and they marveled. And then the king asked the knight to tell him how to manage the steed. The knight replied, "Sir, there is really nothing more to learn. When you wish to go anywhere, twirl the pin in his ear. I will tell you about this privately, and tell him the name of the place you wish to go. That is all there is to it, and when you have come to where you would stop, twirl another pin, and tell him to descend, and he will go down at once. Moreover, he will stand precisely where you leave him, and even if the whole of the world should try to move him, they would not be able to stir him from the place. If you wish to send him away from you, twirl this other pin, and he will vanish from sight. When you want him again, you will only have to call him in a way that I teach you when we are by ourselves. So you are free to ride wherever you wish." This brave and noble king soon learned from the knight the secret of the pins. He had the bridle carried to the tower to be kept among his most precious jewels, and he bade the horse disappear. Then, glad of heart at possessing such a treasure, he returned to the revellings. All night long, and almost to the coming of day, Cambuscan and the lords feasted in merriment and jollity. As the dawning drew near, one after another grew sleepy, and at last all the king's visitors had gone to their beds. They slept till broad daylight. Canacee, however, was more moderate. She had gone to her rest soon after the evening had begun, for she had no idea of looking pale in the morning. After her first sleep when she awoke, and she felt so delighted with her curious ring and her mirror that her color came and went, not once but 20 times. She went to sleep again, but even in her sleep she had a vision of the mirror. She was wide awake before sunrise, and when she called to her governess, who slept close by, and said she wished to rise, the governess said, "Madame, folk are all at rest. Where will you go so early?" "I will get up and walk out a little," Canacee replied. So the governess called 10 or 12 of the ladies in waiting. Canacee was soon ready, and was as fresh and bright as the sun himself. She dressed herself in light clothes, for it was a mild and pleasant season, and roamed about the park with only 5 or 6 of her attendants. The mist rising from the south made the sun look broad and red. It was the beautiful morning time. Birds were singing, and the hearts of all the company leaped up with joy. But Canacee had still more reason to rejoice, for she found that she could understand the meaning of every song. Now high above the head of the princess, in an old tree dry and white as chalk, sat a falcon. She was wondrously beautiful, so fair both in color and in form that she looked like a wanderer from a strange and marvelous country. She seemed to be in sore distress, for she cried so piteously that the whole wood echoed, and she had beaten her wings so harshly that the red blood was running down the tree. And she never ceased crying and shrieking and plucking at the feathers from her breast so cruelly that there is not a tiger or any other beast that would not have wept, if he could weep, for pity of her. Canacee still had on her finger the ring that the knight had brought, and so of course she could understand everything that the bird said, and could answer it again. For sometimes she stood watching, and then she said, "Will you not tell me why it is that you are in such anguish? It must be because someone dear to you has died, or else that someone has been false to you in love. Tell me your trouble, I beg. I am the king's daughter, and if you will only come down from the tree, I will do all in my power to remove your sorrow, and to, I know, the use of many an herb, I can easily find some to cure your wounds." The falcon made no reply, save to cry more piteously than before. Then she fell to the ground and lay there in a swoon. Canacee took her up and held her tenderly till she had come to herself. She told a sad tale of a tercelet that had won her heart, and then deserted her for love of a fair young kite. And as she spoke, the tears of Canacee fell like rain, and all of her women shared in her sorrow.
How to comfort the hawk was the question. Candace wrapped her softly in bandages, dug herbs, and made salves to heal her. She carried her most gently into the palace, and she worked from morning till night, trying to help her. Close to the head of her bed she made a cage, and covered it with velvet of blue, the color of truth, in token of truth that it is in woman. Footnote: Chaucer did not complete this story. The ending given here was written by Edmund Spenser nearly 200 years later. Now, sirs, I fear that you will blame me sorely for an unfinished tale, but I can only do my best. I would gladly rehearse to you the lengthy account of the conquests of this great King Cambuscan, and of how many cities he won, also of Algesif and Camballo, how they were wondrously aided in their exploits by the magic steed of brass. But truly, sirs, he from whom I had the tale could tell me nothing of its ending. When I bewailed this to a learned friend who dwelt here in our own country, he of his courtesy most kindly offered to partly end the tale, for either he had heard some distant legend, or else to his own mind, for verily, sirs, he was a poet, had come the fancy, and he knew not whence. This is the ending that he gave. Fair Candace was truly loved by many a lord and many a knight of greatest worthiness, but she refused to give herself to either knight or lord of high degree. Therefore it came to pass that the quarrels rose among her lovers, and often they fought most grievously. Camballo, her wise brother, saw that this would lead to battles, and, it might be, to rending of the kingdom. One day, when many of her lovers, warlike men and bold, had met together, and there seemed like to be a bloody slaughter for her sweet sake, Camballo bade them listen to his words. "That all this strife may cease," he said, "I here proclaim a trial by arms, and Lady Candace shall be its prize. Do all you who would win my sister's hand choose from among you three the stoutest and the bravest of the company. With those three, each one in turn, will I hold combat, and when he overcomes the brother, shall win the sister for his wife." Then there was silence among the suitors, and one by one they drew back from the challenge. They were brave young men, these knights and lords, but it was known among them that Camballo had a magic ring of such virtue that no matter how often or how severely he was wounded, the wound would close at once and heal. "We fight with mortals, not with faerie," said the knights. And finally none were left to seek the prize save three brave brothers of such valor that they would give up their lives rather than withdraw. The day for contest arrived. The lists were made ready. 6 judges were chosen to view the deeds of arms, and on a lofty platform fair Candace was set to be the prize of him who should win her by his bravery. The knights advanced in shining armor. Camballo entered first alone into the lists with stately steps and fearless countenance. To meet him came the 3 brothers, with gilded scutcheons and broad banners widely floating. They made humble obeisance to fair Candace. The trumpets and the clarions sounded loud and shrill, and such a fight began as men have rarely witnessed. To make a long story short, I will say that brave as were the brothers, and furious as were their cuts and thrusts, they had small chance in contest with a foe whose every wound was healed almost as soon as given, and the first 2 were slain before much time had passed. The fight with the third, however, was fierce, as if Camballo was contending with 3 rather than 1, and indeed he was, though he knew it not. The mother of all these 3 brothers was a fay who knew all secret things. She discovered by her magic arts that the lives of her sons would be short, and she besought the fates to bestow upon her a single boon. "When the first shall die," she pleaded, "grant that all remaining of the space of his life's natural term shall be given to the second, and that when he too shall come to his death, all that remains of his life and strength and that of his brother shall be added to the third." This prayer was granted, and this is why the contest waxed so fierce. For Camballo was not fighting with one, however stout and hardy he may be, but with 3 doughty champions. Suddenly a loud clamor was heard, and a strange chariot, decked with gold and gorgeous ornaments, and drawn by 2 savage lions, dashed through the crowd and into its lists like a whirlwind. A lady of the rarest beauty sat in the chariot. In her right hand she bore a rod of peace, and in her left was a magic potion called Nepenthe. She greeted first her brother, and then Camballo, though to Camballo she spoke but shyly, for at the first glance at him she felt young love arising in her heart. They paid her small attention, and even her prayers and tears that they would cease their strife availed her not at all. Then with the magic power that she had learned from her mother, wise in fairy lore, she stood upright and touched them lightly with her wand of peace. Their swords dropped from their hands, and they stood staring at each other in amazement. "Drink," bade the maiden. She held out to them her golden cup filled with the drink that brings forgetfulness. As soon as they had drunk from this, their contest was forgotten. Each saw in a man before him so brave and noble a champion that he had no choice but to love him and respect him. So it was that each one gave a friendly kiss unto the other. They clasped each other's hand and pledged their word that ever after this they would be true and faithful friends, and stand by each other in both woe and weal. The people shouted in wonder and joy till the very heavens rang. Canacee descended from her lofty seat and gave warm greeting to the stranger. Then, in the gorgeous chariot, sitting by her side, the two fair maidens rode homeward, as if dear and loving sisters. So it was that gentle Canacee was won, and to make the tale some few words longer, so it was that Camballo gained a wife with whom he passed long years of happiness. End of Chapter 10.
Chapter 11 of the Chaucer Storybook. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Chaucer Storybook by Ava March Tappan. Chapter 11. The Franklin's Tale. "In faith, young squire," said the Franklin heartily, "you've done well. According to my judgment, there is not one here who is your equal in eloquence." "Come, Mr. Franklin," the host broke in, "you know that each of you must tell at least one or two tales or break his word." "That know I, sir," responded the Franklin, "but I beg you do not hold me faithless if I speak a word or two to this man." "But first tell us your tale," cried Harry Bailey. "I will obey your will," replied the Franklin courteously. "Here is my story. If I can only tell it in such wise as to please you, then I shall know that it is well done. The Promise of Dorigen. There was once in the land of Brittany a knight named Arviragus, who was doing his best to win the love of a noble lady, the fairest under the sun. He carried on many a bold enterprise and undertook many a perilous adventure, all for her sake, that she might perchance look with the more favor upon his suit. She came of such high lineage that he hardly dared to tell her of his devotion. But when he did confess it, he found that he had already won his bride, for he was so sincere and humble and in every way worthy that she could not help loving him, and she promised to take him for her husband and her lord. He too made a promise, and vowed to her most solemnly that, come what would, he would never force her obedience against her wish, nor would he show jealousy of her, but would obey her and follow her will in everything, as a true lover should ever do to his lady. "And I give you here my troth," said Dorigen, for that was her name, "that until my last day I will be your faithful, humble wife." The couple dwelt in happiness for a year and more. Then they were separated, for the knight went to England for a year or two to seek for glory in arms. Dorigen could hardly endure his absence. She wept and she sighed, she moaned and wailed, and so longed for Arviragus that the whole wide world seemed nothing to her without him. Her castle stood near the sea, and she used often to go to the edge of the cliff and watch the ships and barges. But this gave her small comfort, for she said to herself, "Alas, there are so many ships sailing freely wherever they will, and not one of them brings my dear lord home to me. If he would only come, my heart would be eased of this bitter pain." Sometimes she would not watch the ships, but would only sit on the cliff and muse and think of her husband. Then, if it happened that her glance fell upon the black, jagged rocks below her, she would tremble so that she could not stand upon her feet, for she would fancy that each one was threatening to destroy the vessel that was to bring him home, when the happy day of his return should arrive. Her friends tried in every way they knew to comfort her. They often visited her. They told her that Arviragus would surely return, that she was destroying herself for nothing, and then they would beg her to come out with them. At first they walked by the ocean, but they soon saw that the sight of the water dashing against the black ledges only made her the more wretched. "I wish to God that all those fearful black rocks were sunk into hell for the sweet sake of my lord. They make my very heart quake with fear," she exclaimed. The friends did not ask her again to walk with them by the shore. Instead of that, they persuaded her to go by springs and along the river bank and to other beautiful places. They prevailed upon her to play at chess and at tables and to dance. One bright morning in May, they induced her to go with them to a beautiful garden, where they meant to spend the entire day. This garden was a charming place. The gentle showers of May had filled it full of leaves and blossoms, and the hand of man had given it such wise and skillful care that, save, it may be, for paradise, there was never so lovely a place. The sweetness of the flowers and the sight of the freshness and beauty would make the heart of anyone light, unless it was burdened with so deep woe that nothing could give it cheer. These friends of Dorigen had brought dainty viands with them, that they might remain the whole of the day, and after they had dined they began to sing and dance on the soft green turf. Even the sight of dancing made Dorigen grieve, because her husband was not among the merry revellers. Nevertheless, she would not be so rude as to break away from her kind friends, so she waited, sad and lonely in her heart. As she sat, gazing listlessly at the dancers, there was a certain young squire who was gazing at her, but by no means listlessly. He was fresher and more gaily clad than the month of May itself. He sang more sweetly and he danced more gracefully than anyone else, and he certainly was one of the handsomest young men in the world. He was young and strong and rich, highly esteemed, and a favorite wherever he went. And, to make a long story short, for 2 years this young Squire Aurelius had loved Dorigen better than all the world beside. He'd never dared to tell her his love, but he composed many songs, rounds, and virelays about the agonies of one who adores and is not loved in return. In his songs he said that, like Echo, who died for the love of Narcissus, so he should die for her who is so dear to him, and she would never know why he had come to an early death. Writing these songs was his greatest pleasure, but Dorigen never guessed that he was writing them of her, and when in the dances of the young folk he had gazed piteously into her face, like one beseeching some great favor, she'd not understood that he was silently begging her to receive his devotion. As they'd long been acquaintances, it was natural that they should meet and talk together for a while. "Madam," said he, "if it would please you, I could find it in my heart to wish that on the day when your Arviragus crosses the sea, I, too, had gone somewhere never to return. For I know well that my devotion to you will have for its reward only the breaking of my heart. Pity me, madam. Pity me, for I am so unhappy that I would lay in a grave at your feet. Have mercy upon me, or you will be my death, for to think that you will never be mine is more than I can bear." Dorigen started and looked him full in the face. "I call my God to witness," she said gravely, "that Arviragus is my true and beloved husband, and never shall I leave him for any other." And she added solemnly, "Go, and gaze upon those black and jagged rocks that have sent so many a good ship to her destruction, and that threaten the safety of my dear husband, and know that when every one of those rocks has vanished, I will leave my Arviragus for you, and never before. Thrust this folly from your heart. What pleasure can it be to a man to love another man's wife?" Then appeared Dorigen's friends, who'd been roaming about in the garden and had no idea what had been going on between her and Aurelius. The dancing and gaiety lasted till the bright sun had gone below the horizon. Then they all went home merrily, save Aurelius. When he'd reached his home, he dropped upon his knees, and in the agony of his heart he called upon Phoebus Apollo to come to his aid and work a miracle for him that he might so win his lady. "Gracious Apollo, God of the sun," he prayed, "help me, I beg you. Grant that you will beseech your radiant sister Lucina, goddess of the moon, that she will bring so high a tide that it will flow over the loftiest rock on the coast of Brittany. Beg her, I entreat you, to go no faster than you in her course. Then shall she be ever at the full, and there shall be high tide both night and day. If she refuses this prayer, I beseech you to sink the rocks down into the realm of darkness where Lord Pluto dwells. Pity my pain, Lord Phoebus. Help me, and I will make barefoot pilgrimage to your temple at Delphos." Time passed, and Arviragus came home with wealth and honors, and joyfully betook himself to his Dorigen. No words can express her gladness at having again her dearly beloved husband, and as for him, he felt more and more happy every day in the love of so devoted a wife. As for Aurelius, Lord Phoebus had not answered his prayer, and he lay in suffering and longing for Dorigen all this while. No one knew of his pain except his brother. This brother wept and grieved with him and lay awake night after night, trying to think of some way to help the luckless lover to win the lady. Suddenly the thought of an old book that he had seen at Orleans in France when a student came into his mind. It was a book of magic, and it told of marvelous deeds that had been done, or that appeared to those looking on to have been done. His heart danced for joy, for he said to himself, I do believe that there is a way for my brother to be cured. I've often heard that jugglers, coming into a hall of feasting, could make the feasters think that they saw within the hall a lake, and in the lake a barge floating up and down, or that they beheld a savage lion springing in at the door, or flowers growing up as if in a meadow, or a vine producing red and white grapes, or even a castle built out of solid lime and stone. He told all this to his brother, and then he said, Now, if I can find at Orleans some one of my old companions who knows magic, surely he can help us. It cannot be so very difficult to make it appear for a day or two as if there were no rocks on the coast of Brittany, and as if ships were sailing up to the very shore. Aurelius felt as hopeful as his brother. He started up from his bed, and the two set off for Orleans. When they were but 2 or 3 furlongs from the city, they met a young scholar walking alone who greeted them in Latin. Then he said, I know why you have come to Orleans. And he went on to tell them the whole story of Aurelius's sufferings, and their hope that in Orleans they might find help. It was plain that he was a magician, and when he invited them to his house, they went with him most gladly. At the magician's home there was much to see. Their host showed them parks full of wild deer, larger than any that the brothers had ever seen before. Then he let them watch a deer hunt, and with their own eyes they saw deer wounded and 100 slain. Then they saw a beautiful winding river, whereon there were falconers with their hawks taking heron. And after this they saw a tournament, knights jousting on a plain. After the tournament came a dance, and behold, one of the dancers was Dorigen. Aurelius was more than an onlooker here, for he too seemed to be joining the revelry. Oh, it was a marvelously delightful entertainment, but suddenly the magician clapped his hands. All the wonderful sights vanished. There, in the quiet library, sat the host and his 2 guests, and there they had been from the time they had entered the house. For all these wonderful sights had been brought before them by the power of magic. The master called his squire and said, It is now nearly an hour since I and my 2 guests came into my library. Is the supper ready? Sir, replied the squire, the table stands waiting, for all things are prepared. Then we will go and sup, said the master. Even these eager lovers have to eat and rest. There was no question that this was a magician of amazing power. After what the brothers had seen, they did not doubt that he could do so small a thing as conceal a few rocks from view for a while, and so, when their supper had been eaten, they fell to business. There was no need of explanations or long stories to a man so wise that he knew them all beforehand, so they asked him directly what guerdon he would demand for removing every rock on the coast of Brittany, from the Gironde to the mouth of the Seine. That is not so easy a task, the magician declared. It is quite a different matter from sitting quietly in a library and showing you a few deer and a little jousting. I would not attempt it for any trifling reward. I could not think of undertaking it for less than 1,000 pounds, and verily, I am not eager to do it at any price. 1,000 pounds? Aurelius cried joyfully. That is nothing. Folks say the world is round, and I would gladly give the whole round world if I were lord of it. I take your offer, master. The bargain is made. You shall have your payment on the instant, but do not delay us here 1 moment beyond tomorrow morning. I pledge my faith to you, responded the magician. As soon as the morrow had come, they went to Brittany by the nearest way. The master set to work at once with his spells and magic circles and incantations, but work fast as ever he could not satisfy the relentless Aurelius, who would 1 moment bow in reverence to his knowledge, and the next moment threaten to run him through with his sword because he worked so slowly. At length, however, the marvel was accomplished. Not a rock was to be seen. Aurelius fell down at the master's feet and thanked him, and begged his pardon most humbly if in his eagerness he had done aught amiss. He went straight to Dorigen, fell on his knees before her, and said, Madam, do you remember that of your great kindness you promised that when every rock on the coast should have disappeared, you would leave Arviragus and come to me as my wife? Behold, madam, not one remains in sight. And then he took his leave. Dorigen stood like a statue, her face as white as marble, for it had never entered her mind that such a miracle could come to pass. She gazed out upon the water, where not one rock was visible. She gazed shudderingly down the path taken by Aurelius, and then she went to her own house, but not to rest, for there she wept and wailed and groaned and swooned. She had no comfort in her woe, and no one to whom she might venture to tell her trouble, for Arviragus was from home. When her husband returned, he asked her why she wept, and at this she only wept the more. Oh, that I had never been born, she groaned. Arviragus did his best to soothe and comfort her, and at length she told him the sad story, How fearful she had been lest the boat which bore her love might come to grief on the sharp-pointed rocks, and how, wearied and indignant at the persistency of Aurelius, she had declared, half in grave anger and half in scorn, yes, when those black, threatening rocks on Brittany's coast have disappeared, then I will leave my dear Arviragus and come to you. Her husband comforted her as well as he could, for his own heart was breaking. When she was somewhat soothed, he said quietly, but in the deepest sorrow, "My Dorigen, truth is the noblest thing in the world. I love you so that I would rather lose you and have you true than keep you with a broken promise." The strong man burst into a flood of tears, but as soon as he could speak, he bade her leave him and go to find Aurelius. "And I will bear my woe as best I can," he said. Then Dorigen went forth from her husband's house, almost mad with grief. Aurelius, in the hope of seeing her, had hardly taken his eyes from her door, and now he walked by a way where they could not help meeting. As soon as he saw her, he saluted her with a most eager curtsy, but she only moaned, "Alas, alas!" and he entreated her to tell him what her grief might be. When the story came to his ears, then, anxious as he was to win her, yet he could not help pitying her and honoring that noble man, her husband, who loved his wife so dearly and so unselfishly that he would rather lose her than have her break her word. Then said Aurelius, "Madam, farewell. You are the best and truest wife that I have ever seen in all this land. Perhaps a squire can do a courtesy as well as a knight. So go you back to your dear lord Arviragus, and say to him that, as he would rather have you keep your promise and leave him to suffer, so should I rather suffer all my life with longing for you than come between you and your love. And so I bid you my farewell." She knelt before him and thanked him, and then she went home to her sorrowing husband and told him all. And from that day their lives passed on in happiness and peace, for never was there shadow of disagreement between them, and day by day they loved each other more dearly. There is but one more word to say, and that concerns the £1,000. "Alas," groaned Aurelius, "that I have promised £1,000 of gold to this magician. What shall I do? I could pay him a portion every year and thank him for his great courtesy, if he will permit. But if I have to pay him all at once, I must sell my lands and live a beggar. There's no other way. Whatever comes, I will not lie. I will keep my promised word." With a sad heart, he went to his treasury and took out £500. Then he went to the magician and said, "Master, I've never yet broken my word, and my debt to you shall be paid if I have to go forth from my home as a beggar. But if I give you surety, would you grant me a delay of 2 or 3 years? If not, I must sell my lands." The magician demanded sternly, "Did I not keep my agreement with you?" "Surely you did, and to the letter," the squire replied. "Did you not win your lady?" the magician asked. "Oh no," said the squire, and sighed sorrowfully. "How was that? I pray you tell me if you can." Aurelius told the whole story, and ended with the words, "Arviragus would rather die in sorrow than that his wife should be false to her word, so he bade her come to me. Dorigen had never heard of magical appearances when she gave her promise, and she sorrowed so sadly that I sent her back to him. That is all, and there is no more to the story." The magician answered, "Dear brother, he is a knight, and you are a squire, but you are equally noble. Now surely a clerk can do as honest a deed as any of you, and therefore, sir, I release you from the £1,000 as freely as if I had never seen you. You paid well for my food and lodging, and not a penny will I take for either skill or work. It is enough. Farewell, and good day." Now, of these 3 generous men, which one was the most generous? End of chapter 11.